So let's see how we can calculate quantities of reactants and products in any chemical reaction. So when we say quantities, we're talking about how much of product or how much of reactant. And for now, we are going to be using grams. There are two ways we can measure quantities. We can measure quantities in grams. We can measure quantities of reactant or product in moles. So let's go with grams first. So the question says 64 grams of copper react with 16 grams of oxygen to give the black compound copper 2 oxide. What mass of copper would react with 32 grams of oxygen? So you will always start your calculation from the information given in the example. So I always call the information given in the example, I call it basis. So that is the base, let me call it base, where you are going to put your calculation on. So let's put this one again. This is 64 grams of copper reacts with 16 grams of copper Cu react with, let me write it very well. So react Cu react with 16 grams of oxygen. So this is the information given. So question now says, the question says what mass of copper will react with 32 grams of oxygen. So if you go back to the first law here, the law says that elements always react in the same ratio to form a given compound. So let's look at the ratio by which they react, by which oxygen and copper react. So the ratio is 64 grams of copper to 16 grams of oxygen. We can lower it down. We can just look at the factors of this. So let me use calculation directly from here, the calculator from here. 64 divided by 16 equals what? Equals 4. So that is the ratio here, and that's the smallest value here. So we do the same thing here. 16 divided by 16. So what I'm trying to do is to get the smallest value of the two. So I think I've gotten the smallest value of the two now. It's like instead of dealing with this big value, we can just say ratio 4:1. So 4 grams of copper to 1 gram of oxygen. So we can use this one now to do our calculation. So if it is 32 grams of oxygen, how many grams of copper is it going to react with 32 grams of oxygen? So we just put 32 on the oxygen here, 32 grams. If it is 22 grams, what's going to be the amount of copper that will react? That's very simple. They react in ratio 4:1. 4 of copper to 1 of oxygen. So if it is now 32 of oxygen, what will it be for copper? So just cross multiply and get what you need. So it's going to be 4 by 32. So what will 4 times 32 be? So let's just put this here directly. 4 times 32, 4 multiplied by 32 equals 128. So it means we use 128 grams of copper will react with 32 grams of oxygen. This can also follow the rules. If you divide 128 by 32, you are going to get 4. 32 by 32, you're going to get 1. So the ratio they still maintain the ratio 4 to 1. So if you go back to the law again, the first law says elements always react in the same ratio to form a given compound. So the ratio here is ratio 4 to 1. If it is 64 grams to 16 grams, it is 4 to 1. If it is 128 grams to 32 grams, it is still ratio 4 to 1. So let's look at the second example. Say what mass of oxygen will react with 32 grams of copper. Sorry. Yeah. What mass of oxygen will react 32 grams? So we just go back to the ratio without wasting our time. Cu and oxygen. It is ratio 4 to 1. Now, if copper is 32 grams now, 32 grams. If that is for copper, what will it be for oxygen? Of course, I will use Y to represent oxygen now. Then we cross multiply again, multiply this by this, and we'll put equality sign. So Y will equal to, it will equal to 32 over 4. 32 divided by 4. And so let's quickly do the calculation here. 32 divided by 4. 32 divided by 4. It's going to be 8 grams. 8 grams of oxygen. So it means anytime 32 grams of copper reacts, it will react with 8 grams of oxygen. So they still follow the ratio. What mass of copper 2 oxide will be formed in B? So of course copper react with oxygen to give us copper 2 oxide, CuO. So we have to balance the equation. First, it is 2 here. Even if we don't need the equation, at this level we don't even need the equation, since we know that we get 32 grams of copper here that reacts, and that it reacts with 8 grams of oxygen. 8 grams of oxygen. So here we want to apply the second law. The second law says the total mass does not change during a chemical reaction. You can see the second law here. The total mass does not change during a chemical reaction. So let's look at the total mass. Total mass of reactant equals total mass of a product. The total mass of reactant is equal to 32 plus 8, which is what? That should be 40, right? 40 grams. So without doing any calculation here, the mass of copper 2 oxide formed will be capital letter 40 grams. So we're using the second law now. So the last question says how much copper and oxygen will give 8 grams of copper 2 oxide. It's the same way to solve, to approach it. So let's put this again. We have Cu, we have oxygen here, and we have copper 2 oxide. Let me write it this way. I don't want to confuse you with the balancing equation, oxide, which is also very simple. So here this one will be 32 grams. 32 grams plus 8 grams give us 40 grams. How do we make 40? How do we make it 8? Because the question says if it is 8 grams. So let's try and make 40. Let's make it 8. So it's going to be 40 divided by 5. So divide this one by 5. So what we do to this, because it's going to give us 8 grams now, so we do it to the rest of them. Divide by 5, divide by 5. So if you divide this one by 5, what are we going to get? So let's put it here. 32 divided by 5, 32 divided by 5 will give us what? 6.4 grams. and this side 8 divided by 5 will give us 1.6 grams. So it means 1.6 grams of oxygen will react with 6.4 grams of copper to give us 8 grams of copper 2 oxide. I said you can also follow the ratio. That's the simplest one. The ratio is ratio 4 grams. The simplest ratio is 4 grams to 1 gram. And remember, total ratio is going to be 5 grams. So if we want to make this one 8 grams, if this is 8 grams, what will this one be? What will this one be? So that's another way to approach it. If you cross multiply, we take this one. Let's take this one first. So x will equal to it will equal to 8 divided by 5, and that is what we got up there, 1.6 grams. And we take this side, we just say y will equal to 32, that is 4 by 8 divided by 5. It's going to be 6.4 grams. So that's the way to approach the questions.